The purpose of voicing is not an embellishment or a three-dimensionalization of music. Not only is it analyzed reading of the text rendered so that the listener is directed by the layered highlighting of the layers to perceive the music from a certain aesthetic point of view, or even from some typically planned or possibly improvised on the spot voicing. And now the problem is that when you have music written like Bach Goldberg variations for double harpsichord, and you have intertwined voices like middle voices of fugues by Bach, for instance, between tenor and alto in four-part fugues, when they're interplay and overlap, you wonder if the composer thought that the understanding would be in a combination or in a layered bringing out the specific design of it's almost a graphic interpretation of the piece. That could be done with articulation, one voice being non-legato, one being quasi-legato, or it could be one being louder than the other. And why this more than the other in the conversation of equals, as polyphony is often. But then again, it's not necessarily only in polyphony per se, like a fugue, a motet, a choral music, or a symphonic structure on the texture of the piano playing by a single musician. An orchestra has so many brains merging into one through the conductor, and the pianist is dividing the brain into so many entities as if you have an orchestra by your fingers or through your fingers. So you have the different elements that blend or meant to blend, while in the voicing you bring out some that you outline in a way that they don't blend. Of course, if the audience intellectually, philosophically knows the piece, then they can choose to accept or reject your type of voicing, where you privilege this part or the other, with a purpose or on the spot, with analytical understanding of what wants or needs to be for the readability of the text to be brought up, or just your intuition, your soulful drive. I believe very much in the fact that we should not replace the one by the other. We should find a lifelong search for a construction where the two blend together, the innate and the acquired. It doesn't mean that the complexity of following several lines at the same time is an impossibility for an untrained ear of a listener. It means that I believe that you bring your highlighting point of view, just like a director in a film chooses which angle the camera will capture. The eyes are the full body of an actor, and how the emotion, the expression of the words that will be said or the silence that would be maintained will evoke the intensity of the purpose of the scene. It's always a narrative element between silences and expression, literally from Latin ex outwards. Impression is what you receive. So if the performer expresses, the receiver receives it, And if the receiver doesn't know what they receive, they take it for what it is. They cannot compare. Just like you read a book because you're alphabetized, so you can read by yourself the book. Does it mean you understand the intricacies and the perhaps innuendos of the writer? Not necessarily, but at least you get something of the idea that is vehicled through the storytelling, and then you start imagining your own inner world, your own inner film. And you don't need a director to make a cut or to make camera angle that enhances or unenhances an element of importance, like in music would be by analogy an accent, a sforzando, a crescendo, a diminuendo, a ritenuto, an articulation. So much is hinted rather than stated. So much is in the music itself, but the music itself doesn't stay separately from the performer. I think there is an interaction, like the horseman and the horse, like the element and the environment. And when we have music that is spiritually elevated because it's meant to be, by its conception and text, to be sacred music, then it has that sacred purpose. But in a way, without the context, you can say that every interval gesture is having its individual symbolic gesture that can be interpreted in that way too. So therefore, the separation between a sacred and not sacred music for some composers like Mozart, Bach, Schubert, etc., is less obvious. It seems like you have a conversation between the voices, a conversation with the listener, a conversation through the vibrating membrane of the performer, who brings you as a listener more or less all the texture, raw or voiced, that means shaped, which means sculpted, which means with shadow and lights, which means with subjective choices. And not everything is indicated in the score as faithfully as we want to teach it, as we need to, in order to be faithful to the intent of the composer beyond the filter of the notation, the additions and the subsequent copies, and the misunderstandings of different time periods about some markings, and then the suggested interpretational affect, such as rubato, which is added as some kind of an ingredient to loosen this pulse or to enhance that other pulse of the rhythm. And then you have those who consider it's too much, not enough, from the point of view. But then inevitably, the music, the element of pitches with pulses and organized harmonic or post-tonal or polyphonic or just layered, not necessarily polyphonic elements divide your attention. Therefore, the purpose of what you're supposed to vehicle through the storytelling, either as a purposeful theme, either an atmospheric mood, and not necessarily a thematic action, but just a being. Orchestral colors of timbres of instruments supplement that so well. Orchestra on the piano becomes more like a black and white photography with shadows and lights, chiaroscuro. And by the decay of the instrument's length of sound, the tempi then are determined, even if with the pedal we have the enhanced capacity to extend that when a bow or the breathing of the wind instrument of the singer indicates the tempo in a more physical aspect of the flow of the events. So an andante for oboe is not an andante for piano or for organ, especially electric supplied air in the pipes continuously. Therefore, the tempo, the pace, the pulse in a non lexical music that is only sounds, pure music as we like to call it, not necessarily pure in the sense of any kind of impurity, but compared to even lyrics that direct the attention towards the purpose that they vehicle, even if you do or not follow them, understand them or not, phonetically or in a translation, or again, even in language, especially in language, the innuendos in translation can be lost so easily because poetry is music by the choice of the words beyond the meaning by themselves. So if they put into sounds with music, singing and instruments and dancing and opera and perhaps oratorio or a film or a video game or what have you not, where you have an opera in a sense of the Italian word work, of the combined art forms, you're touched by the elements that you hear, see, follow, psychologically manipulated by the storytelling, expectation, delay, syncopation that suggests not only delay resolution of an expectation, but also continuous, sometimes Schumann specifically, but not only, employing this kind of affect to create the sense of longing, anguish, expectation, daydream, out of this worldness. Ingredients don't justify the vehicle. The vehicle is there to justify the purpose, and the purpose is to convey an inspiration, and the inspiration is there to convey the purpose of humanity, if not defined, at least in its experience of uplifting or lowering, of hope and passion and despair and drive and anger and angst and well-being and expectation of something that we long for. And all these ingredients in theater, in dance, in music, combined or separately, you draw in the air gestures to suggest an uplifting or a dropping, and how you drop and how you uplift, how much and where, and what is the aesthetics of that and this. And when the instruments evolve from lute to harpsichord to piano to through organ to electronics, the breathing, the production of a phrase, the idea of imitating the voice on the instrument that doesn't carry breath or lyrics, but imitates by the gestures of a leap of an interval or repeated notes for endearment or restatement of a purpose. You can analyze and put a point of view in music painting of gestures of human psyche, psychologically manipulating, so to say, the listener to get into the sense of what movie music does essentially, which is accompany or enhance the psychological situation in which the heroes are placed in a given situation. So you feel the it's almost beyond suggestive. Sometimes it can be playfully, purposely not depicting the psychological or emotional state of the scene, though it's more intellectual approach. But intuitively, it would be more that. The tenderness, the drive, the happiness, the sadness, yeah. And I find that ultimately, if music is a language, and it is, it talks directly to our psyche, especially instrumental, beyond lyrics, despite of people referring to music when they're not musicians as songs, because by essence they assume it's always connected to lyrics that helps them remember them when they, in the 19th century, sing an aria from an opera that struck them in the city, in the streets, or today pop music. Um, the melody is a vehicle. It's like the perfume of the soul. It carries its melodic uplifting in a national anthem or in a patriotic expectation or in a lullaby to soothe the beloved child. I mean, obviously, we use music not only as a language but as a purposeful usage for relaxing or exciting or enhancing or tantalizing. Ultimately, when we play a music piece, we create a music world, like a theater play pretends to recreate a universe within which characters represent humanity's flaws and passions, and we recognize ourselves in them, through them, in an ironic or in a tragic way, or in the mirror of ourselves, um, deformed or farcical or truthful or realistic or analogical, so that we feel like we can refer to another time period comfortably away from our own, when we are telling a story that, if told in our time, would become more relevant, because we would feel more intimately in, connected to its truth. After all, the music of the past that we play so much in so-called classical music, from the Renaissance to contemporary, literally, was modern in their own time. We classify them as this and that through the time for purposes of organizing the teaching of it and the research about it and the knowledge about it and the stylistic, in a way, convenient placing in impossible boundaries to be kept for contextual time periods, because you have always those who jump or modernistically in a given century ahead, and others who a century late or 1 century behind. And in both cases, the avant-garde and the old guard, so to say, express essential things about us that mean to us beyond the chronology of their time periods. And so we don't replace them, or shouldn't consider like Brahms is a late romantic or a late classic. No, he was when he was, and he wrote what he did. And when we listen to him, or Rachmaninoff, atonal music was written. When Rachmaninoff wrote tonal music, it doesn't make him, in my view, old-fashioned. It makes him eternal. And so does the music of the composers who revolutionized the alphabet, the story, the very syntax of the music language that was used for centuries before through the tonal system, with various alterations, adaptations to it, or customizations, if you want, by different time periods composers, with a form that was breaking a style that was established or became old-fashioned quickly. But humans don't obey rules. They obey their own inner world. Of course, if the honesty of music production is to be honest, then it responds to our being. And it touches honestly the beings beyond all these knowledgeable facts of when and why it was composed, which is essential to know, but not essential to love. To love is to be touched by the humanity of it, or the elevation of spirit of it, or whatever you want to call it that it touches you for or through. And of course, because you want to know, you go to school, you go to university, you go to classes, you learn more about how it's done, but not necessarily to make you understand why you love it. You understand how to perhaps better serve it, at least have options how to serve it differently. And I insist as a teacher not to impose mine, while I try to convince that my views coming from my teachers, from my understanding and my experience, humbly represent what I think, I believe, I cherish in it, and therefore how I voice it and how I bring it out. But I don't clone the students to think, play, display, disperse the music like I do. It's not about arrogance, not about ego, nor about narcissism. I think it's just about being a scholar in front of the music and humbly but honestly, which takes a toll on the self-esteem, consider yourself a lifelong student of the piece, next to the next generation students who discover it for the last weeks or months, even if you have lived with it for the last decades. That doesn't make you have the answers and they only the questions. They come up perhaps intuitively with some answers you never thought of because of your path through the piece, with the way you were taught or the way you were hearing it by others when you were growing up discovering it. And people played it before us and they'll play it after us. So it goes through us, and some of us think, okay, this is what I believe, what it means to me, or I identify to it. Perhaps I even own it, not, of course, in any other shape, but in a sense of probably, I would say, appropriation of the inspiration in which I recognize my own experience of life. Of course, ideally, if I compose a ballade while I play a ballade by Chopin, then I'll put in all the things Chopin didn't put in. Doesn't mean that it will be better, of course, naturally, most likely not, but it will be different. It will represent what I have gone through, reached to, and believed to, and therefore, if I voice a certain way the ballade by Chopin, and somebody voices a different way my own ballade if I wrote one, then the chain of creative revisitation of a beloved score of music, where the music is only signs on a document, comes alive through your psyche. And I don't believe in that. Some scholars prefer to talk about objective separation between not over-involving in the text. Now that exists. And there were, now we can hear with recordings since basically the beginning of the 20th century, that the same piece meant differently to so many different people or audiences of theirs, or the way they display the legato, the phrasing, the tempo, the pulse, the pedaling, the rubato, the ritenuto or not, or yes or how much. Who finds it tasteful, who finds it laughable today, or it was tasteful or tasteless already then? And who defines that? The reviewers, teachers, musicologists, scholars? What criteria? Who knows how it was played when it wasn't recorded? Or perhaps how differently it was played, not a single way. And the grace notes which are measured, were they half of the pattern, or were they played on the beat or before the beat, and the trills and the ornaments on the upper note or the real note? Yes, that is the acquired. We learn, we study, we go through treatises, we read articles, we learn through books about people who researched and found certain objective facts about how music was approached before the metronome's objective beats a minute pulse, compared to just the indication of the experience of the piece with a meter that does or doesn't always, alas, also objectively correspond to the driving us towards the right tempo. There are courants in 2/2 and in 2/4 and all that. I plunge myself in an abyss, a rabbit hole, when I think about this Babel Tower of innuendos, exaggerations, hints, traditions, how to approach this or that unobjectively notated part which is given to the performer to, within the context of their own time or now outside of it, define what it means through an instrument and acoustics and listeners' point of view and span of attention and expectation of length. And you realize that civilizationally we evolve so much in our way of apprehending the longing, the expectation, the tension, the release, the drive or the anxiety, the anxious and the heavenly or the settled compared to the unsettled, the hemiolas versus the syncopations on the beats or not, the pulses of long and short, short and long, the upbeat is a lighter beat, downbeat is a stronger beat, or the inversion of it, how the music creates its own ethos, and how composers navigate through it with the perceived tradition of their past for as much as they were aware of, because more and you go in the past, more you know that the musicians of the past knew less about the music of their past in plural traditions, let less outside of their European civilization, than we do today, ethnomusicologically, historically, aesthetically, music theoretically, analytically, and what type of analysis we apply, and how we organize the vertical versus the horizontal, how we structure the hypermeter or not, how the notation is translated from the intent, how the respect for the repeats or the unmeasured grace notes is placed, and how the crossover voicings are brought in a way that the top is always heard, or if the one plunging under has to be heard, then the top has to be played softer. And then you start already, you cannot objectively present all the elements phenomenologically. You have to a certain extent, accept that you do it with your own personal involvement in it. This is what it means to me. Might be wrong. I might change mind. Not doctrinary, unless I am. Some people are, I'm not, but it's okay. I am here to accept the alterity of the opinions, because I think that is how civilized people approach the unknown for which they want to serve it with honesty. Nobody owns the truth, but everybody can contribute towards creating a sense of connection to it that makes you feel like, oh, with this performer, I feel closer to what I like in the piece. And then somebody else plays it and you discover a different point of view and say, wow, I never imagined this piece could be that. Rejecting it or accepting it, that is afterwards a question of personal attitude between tolerance and intolerance, but ultimately it exists besides you. The piece exists before you and will exist after you. So if it's a lesser played piece, lesser heard piece, lesser known piece, you have more margins of freedom to express it in the way that it means to you than if you play something that everybody in the audience knows, have played, or has already compared performances of. Then you feel like you fit in a tradition, or you purposely break that tradition by saying, hey, I'm free from it, or accept it, and I am free within it. And I think this is a very important wisdom of the ties that free. You understand the purpose of the ties, and when you're free from the ties, you accept them because they bring you to a structure, to boundaries that allow you then to develop further your freedom within the accepted, and by whom? By who you trust or admire for the boundaries. if you're allowed to do anything with anything, there is no more boundaries, and therefore, yes, there is a liberation, there is a libation, you have a sense of, um, while the others struggle with the rules, I can freely play what I want. And in that case, why not one's own piece? And if in turn somebody else plays your own piece the way they want, then you should understand even better what it means to be humble, truly humble, in respecting the boundaries while exponentially expanding your mapping the intellectual and emotional um, structure that you display in front of an audience during a given ephemeral moment where the music appears in a combination of sounds and disappears as soon as you finish playing ephemerally. But it existed so true, realistically, as if you could hold it. But in fact, it's only your inspired projection. And therefore, how you project the voicing, I think, brings so much of you in the piece. And I think it's a good signature of yourself. Of course, the quality of the tone, the choice of the sound. Is it mezzo piano, mezzo pianissimo? How many shades of softer with intensity can I whisper? Can I play under the escapement of the piano without having a hole or without having an accent? How do I control the whispered until the screamed? And what are my margin of progressions according to the structure of the group of bars, or how I want to construct it? In other words, you map a plan with your teacher, with your recordings, with your friends, or with your own changing minds. And because you think outside of the box, you play within the box, you think, you do. It's like a conductor who doesn't doesn't play. It's a paradox, I said. Of course, the orchestra plays, the conductor doesn't. You're the conductor and the orchestra all at once. And it's very difficult to be independent counter and independent monitor of what you do while you produce it, regardless if it's according to plan or the unexpected of the moment. And that I find to be very important also to take in account, that music is not frozen only in the projection analytically of what we're supposed to bring out and how, but also of how it comes out, either because we don't control it, either because the instrument we don't control enough. And it's not even only about control, it's about how much the composer, by bunching several layers in the same octave, in the same hand, we given the stretch, combines the voices that are written on the paper with stems up and down. And if you voice them, then inevitably one is heard more than the other, which means that the texture becomes perhaps more transparent, more digestible for the listener, but not necessarily right, because the complexity, it's also it's the texture's complexity is its identity as well. You're not here to reduce it, to make it digestible. You have to bring out not every note, as we like to think, because in opposition of the wrong note, which we dread to do. That is a physical, muscular memory situation where we practice the shifting, the preparation, the anticipation, the touch, so that we direct ourselves in anticipation to the right key. So the fingering, the phrasing, the articulation, all that goes in the construction of how we're going to handle it reliably, but not always, because you have also the emotion that the music brings you while you play it, even if you try to dominate it, like an actor dominates his or her emotion or humor. If the text is there to be humorous or dramatic, it's not you who have to be, it is the text. Therefore, you're the vehicle. And if you start laughing at the funny text, people don't laugh. Or if you are dramatic for yourself, People watch you act, but they don't believe in you because you're no more the, as the English Actors School says, rupture of disbelief. You have to be believable in what you know in the get-go. You're not it. You incarnate it, or you become it during this ephemeral moment of the performance. And all this repetitive practicing almost kills that magic, because you have to do it for muscular memory, practicing for memorization knowledge. And then by the time you have to perform it one time through, with the repeats that are intended in the music or in the signs or in anything that has to be done according to what you think should be done, or you're told, or you agreed or disagreed or decided against the advice and might change mind, but one way or the other, you perform it from A to Z. And the structure of the details that become so out of proportion when practiced individually, section by section, subsection by subsection. It's almost like spelling bee versus using syllables into words, and then into sentences, into chapters, into paragraphs, into books. The details combined don't produce the whole, and the whole is not only the, you cannot divide it into details, you know, it's like a, capacity of imagining that a performance of a piece is a passage through sections that you have to go through correctly. It is partly that, but it's not only that. It's how you make the transition be meaningful, how you bring the tempo of the other theme, how you organize it within the whole thing, if it's a fantasy or if it's a sonata, if it's a form, or if it's a fragment of three thoughts that come one after the other, and what you think, you feel, you understand, or you misunderstand, but you try to, it means, and how you handle the language and the context, and outside of its context, in today, the ornament, the trill, the dynamics, the pedaling, yes or no, harmonically, inevitably or not, and which fingerings can help with finger pedaling if you don't want to get blur, but you don't want to be dry. And again, the definitions of all these are so much embedded in our aesthetic choices. Of course, we listen to recordings of others. Everybody has come up with a solution, but we see the tip of the iceberg in the recordings, not the thought process of the practicing towards where the performers leave us with a recording. We listen to hear how they approach what we try to approach. Beyond the technical prowess, it's also the intellectual understanding of the structure, and then the narrative storytelling, and then therefore the voicing, the articulation, the dynamics, the tasteful statement according to each of us subjectively, with the objectivity of the score for all and the difference of opinion, and therefore in teaching, in comparing interpretations as œuvres on the œuvre, or the œuvre itself analytically bringing you the answers that you would like to apply for your articulation or voicing. Such and such voiced this part more this way, and I liked it or I didn't like it. That's more by reaction. It's not wrong, after all, it exists, and that's why more than my generation when I was young, we have access to so many of the readings of the others through their playing, and so we can accept it or entice ourselves through it, or reject it, or choose to be vindicated by saying, they also thought like what I think today, but since we're here to find through our teacher a trust in what we think, if not the truth, at least the constructed truth towards the essence of the composer's intent that we try not to betray. Not only by a wrong note that we try to hope we won't have the lack of control technically to avoid, but the unevenness of a note or ending of a phrasing that intuitively should diminish because of a tension release in the musical language, but we could choose to bridge further by diminishing it, not, but rather not augment it, but sustain it so that the attention span of the listener is brought further, intriguing or perhaps provoking. But if it's done with conviction, yes, the convinced person can be convincing. And how do you gather this conviction is, of course, by testing and trying and rejecting and comparing, and then reading again and again the music, the text, and try to understand how the next thought came to the composer compared to what it could have gone. It's an identification with something that happened before us, since they heard it before we were born, and they died before we were born, and we visit them as if it's ours today, like it was theirs then. And I find myself as a teacher, that hyphen between the intent of the composer that we are trying to guess and the way we love playing it because it means to us so much in our own way. It's very delicate to the stewardship towards the stylistic tastes and the choices from which a well-informed student will be able to build their own. It doesn't happen overnight, of course. It's a responsible approach rather than copy like me approach, but boundaries are necessary, and then breaking them is necessary, and understanding the purpose of breaking them is necessary, and then experiencing exaggeration is necessary, and the hints or the exaggerations become then the innuendos, and then you find how when you revisit the piece after you have learned it and played it, and revisit it after 6 months, 10 years, I don't know, longer periods, when you revisit it, it keeps on giving differently, and you find yourself, as I said earlier, to be an eternal scholar in front of the piece. Thank you.